Cerna, who imagined Sacramento and its downtown and its neighborhoods as growing into something even greater. I think there still is this division in the city. Maybe I don't want to overstate it too much, but there really is a division where some people say, let us just be the city of beautiful tree-lined neighborhoods. Let us just be sort of the smaller city that we were. And then there are others who say, no, let Sacramento become a more cosmopolitan city, a city that has amenities, the city that is a destination city, the city that attracts more industry and more growth. And I think as we debate on the city council, some of the issues, I think, ask Congress to answer that question. What do we want to be? Do we want to be a big cosmopolitan city, or do we want to be a smaller, sort of Western type city without all the problems that come with growth? What do you say?
I say we can't do that at this point. I think Sacramento was, it's on its path, it's on its course now, but I don't think, as much as I want to think that we can change that as much, but I think we can definitely have an impact on how we deal with that growth. And I think the most important thing is ensuring that we're taking care of the people that are here. And that's one of the biggest concerns that I hear in my communities is there's concern around gentrification, around displacement. And there's concern about being able to stay in the neighborhood that you grew up in, that you love and you want to stay in, but you can't afford it anymore because the price of housing and because you haven't, we don't have that connection point between the kinds of jobs that pay well enough for people to afford that housing and so on. And so I think being really intentional, as the city is starting to do, around those efforts to ensure that people can stay here, that we're taking care of everyone. I think Sacramento is a great place to live. It used to be because of its proximity. People would talk about, its proximity to, Tahoe or the Bay Area or Napa or whatever it might be. But I think also people are realizing Sacramento is a really cool place to be because we have great art and great culture and amazing food. And that's only going to continue to draw people here, whether we like it or not, but it's going to happen. So what we do next is the most important. How do we ensure that people can have a really good quality of life here?
I agree with you. And, you use that G word, gentrification, which is...
I wasn't sure if you were going to say genie.
No, genie. Yeah, you also use the genie word as well. The gentrification, where we want to grow, and I agree with you, because growth brings more opportunity. But how do we grow in a way that ensures that people living in our working neighborhoods aren't priced out? How do we make sure that growth benefits everybody? How do we make sure that there are local hiring agreements so that the young people from the neighborhoods are first in line to be trained and hired? You were part of the community advisory group, SIWD, I believe, right? Or you were part of the community group around the Aggie Square development.
So I was on the board of the neighborhood association. And the neighborhood association was a part. I just want to be really clear because the people who there are people that were working day in and day out as a part of Sacramento Investment Without Displacement, and I didn't have any part in the hard work that they were doing, though I really admired what they did. So I was in the neighborhood association at Borg, which was then a member of that group.
Right, and so we entered into I think a very significant community benefits agreement with the community, and now you're on the other side of the dais here, from the neighborhood association being the elected official. How do you want to see that community benefits agreement implemented, and how do you want to see those kinds of agreements come forward with big development in the future?
Yeah, so I would say, as with anything, devil's in the details, proof is in the pudding, whatever term you want to use.
Any cliche.
Exactly, and I don't have them. But what we do next is most important. How do we implement these programs and make sure that they actually do what we want, what we intended for them to do, that they're doing them to the scale that we want, and that people are able to actually connect with them. So, we had a community, Aggie Square, and the city had a community meeting at the Park Community Center on the 9th. And that was a really interesting place where people from the community came out and learned about what are the programs that are happening, especially around anti-displacement and housing. I walked away from that realizing, one, that a lot of really good work is being done, but two, I think we have some more work to do to ensure that people in the neighborhoods know about it and that they are being connected to it and that they understand how they can benefit and participate in those programs. And then I think, if we see success, how do we measure success, right? Are we looking at these programs, seeing how they're working, if they work really well, or if they need improvements, that we do those things. But then how can we also make sure that they can be done in other places? Because as much as I love that this is happening in the community that I live in, there's a lot of places in the city that could benefit from these types of programs. And how can we see those happen at a bigger scale as we see new development move in and we see new projects moving in? So I'm really supportive of community benefits agreements moving forward, making sure that, especially if they're very large projects, that it doesn't have to be an adversarial thing. It can be a thing where I think people,
partnership.
Yeah, I think that, if you want to build something big in our city or even something small or medium sized, that when you build a partnership with that community and you work together then you have a real partnership. You have people who are going to have your back too with your project. And that's something you should want. So I would love to see something at a broader scale across the city.
I like it. Good. Yeah, I know that we are working with the community. You're involved in this with developing a citywide ordinance that will allow these kinds of agreements to be the way we do business. But my thing is I want to make sure there's enough flexibility so that every project, which may have its unique attributes and also unique challenges, and different communities with different needs and different priorities, that they can be tailored in a way that are unique to each project and each community. So in the next couple of months, as you are in your first months as a city council member, you're going to face your first city budget. And I have, let's see, how many have I done now? I've done a number of them, as well as a number of state budgets. And here's another thing that I think that I find to be what I call creative tension here at City Hall. There are some who say that I call it old city versus new city. Okay, old city is that the city budget and the city priorities should be mostly focused on the traditional core priorities: traditional public safety, parks, city operated and run youth and recreation programs. And I'm not doing justice to what the city does, because the city does a whole lot more than that. Okay.
As I'm learning.
As you are learning. And then there's the new city point of view, which says that in addition to those core responsibilities, and if you don't do those well, you can't do anything else. We all agree on that. But in addition to those core traditional responsibilities, that cities should be investing their public dollars directly in communities: affordable housing trust funds, Measure L, youth services, partnering with the community-based organizations, inclusive economic development, investing directly in some of our less invested in commercial corridors. And so there's not a right or wrong answer here, and everything is on the grade, but on the continuum. How do you see the new city, old city dynamic, especially when it comes to the fact that we don't have endless amounts of money?
We don't?
It took me about 5 years to figure that out, and I'm still, I still am in denial.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good characterization. One of the things that I know some of my colleagues on the city council also agree with this, is how do we always incorporate community voices and community desires into what we're doing, right? Because what we need as a city shifts over time. And sometimes the processes that we create, for better or worse, are pretty static. They're hard to move. They're sometimes inflexible. But what people want and need changes over time based on the experiences that we have in our city, right? And we've seen this in the last few years, of course, housing costs going through the roof. We now know that that's something that we really need to be focusing our energy on. We've seen homelessness skyrocket, 70%, almost 70% in 3 years. That's something that we need to focus energy on now. And so just being able to be nimble is important to me. I think also ensuring that we have a way that we connect with the community and get their input. So I know that there was a participatory pilot program, participatory budgeting, I can say that, pilot program,
how can we make that something that maybe is a little bit more broad too, that we can look at other things in our budget and ensure that those are always aligning with community needs and their priorities as well. And I think that that will help inform us on the basics and the new stuff, right? Like, what does the community think and need around public safety? What does the community think and need around the services that we provide, youth programming, but also, you know, some of the other investments, and just making sure that we're always connected and rooted in that is really important to me. And then as someone who represents many of these corridors that you mentioned, so I have Broadway, I have Stockton, Franklin, Freeport, Florin, and Mac. Those are all within District 5. And so I'm very personally interested in how we can bring revitalization to a lot of these corridors, because that's going to help our communities. It's going to help our small businesses. It's going to help, you know, bring good jobs and help, you know, help these communities thrive. And yeah, so I think that, you know, there is a divide, but, you know, we're going to have to figure out as a council how we put all those pieces together. And I think the community has to be front and center.
Well, I'm glad you're here really to help see that vision through. I know when we did Measure U, the full cent Measure U back in 2018, I campaigned that most of that second half cent would be spent in the community for inclusive economic development. And I think when we look at the numbers, it's actually, we have followed through in a very significant way, but it has been uneven because there are such pressures from so many quarters, including the core city budget, right? And not to go too deep in the California Constitution, but when you do a general tax, you can't specify where the money's going to go. And so that's been a continuing challenge to make sure that we follow through on those promises and at the same time balance the city budget. So let's talk about Caity Maple for a moment, or for a few moments. What brings you here? And what motivated you to run for political office? Because as you already know, it is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's the truth. Well, I've always been really involved. So, you know, ever since I was, you know, pretty young, like fresh out of college or even within college.
Where did you go to college?
I went to UC Davis. Well, actually, I always start with this first. I spent 5 years at community college before I went to UC Davis. So I went to American River College, got 2 associate's degrees, not intentionally. I just took enough classes that by the time I was ready to transfer to Davis, they're like, oh yeah, you have enough for 2. So I said, okay. And I worked in restaurants. I always say my first career was working in the restaurant industry. So I started when I was 15 at a breakfast spot, and I worked there for 8 years, all the way through college.
What was the name?
Perco's Cafe and Grill.
Cafe.
And I worked the 5 a.m. to 2 shifts, 6 days a week for many, many, many years.
Wow.
So even as a young person, I would wake up at 3:45 in the morning and do that because it was the only way I was able to, you know, manage my time to be able to go to school too. So I would get off at 1 o'clock and still have enough time to do my homework or whatever I needed to do.
Work ethic is kind of second nature to you. Yeah.
I definitely didn't have much of a social life for a long time, but I was really committed to getting a degree because that's not something that I had my immediate family members that did. And I didn't really know how to navigate the process. And another one of the big challenges that I had was I left home at the age of 16. So I left home and I never went back, and I was on my own for a long time and trying to navigate how do I work 2 jobs and keep a roof over my head. And I was living in a city in Sacramento where a lot of my family members weren't living at the time. My dad was living in Yuba City at the time. And then before he moved out to Reno for his work. And so trying to figure that out, navigate the jobs, navigate going to school. I was very fixated on wanting to get a degree because I wanted to have opportunity in my life. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to go on a career path of something I was passionate about. So anyway, so I did that, and but always was really involved and connected in my community, whether that's, you know, serving on the boards of my neighborhood associations or different community groups and advocating for issues that I really cared about. And so, you know, come 2020-ish, I was really looking around and seeing some major issues in the community around homelessness, around housing, some of the things that we've already talked about. And, you know, I just thought to myself that, you know, that I should step up and run, and that I thought that I had some really good ideas, and that maybe if I talked to a bunch of people about it, maybe they would agree. And I think, you know, after knocking on thousands and thousands of doors and talking to people over the course of 2 years, it's a really long campaign. Seems like people agreed. So I'm excited to get to work on some of those ideas and bring community ideas along with me.
You also speak about your experience as a small businesswoman, and talk a little bit about that and how that influences your thinking now as a new public official.
Yeah, so that's owning a small business and relying on yourself for income is a challenging path, but it's exciting. So my first job out of college was I worked for the chief clerk's office of the assembly. I think you might have been
Dotson Wilson.
Yeah, I think you might have been in that building at the time. And then I went on and worked for a bipartisan think tank called California Forward. And I did policy research, and I loved it because I'm a nerd and I read everything. And
welcome to the nerd club at City Hall here.
It's amazing. And then I went on and worked in the state legislature as an advocate, and then for a cannabis company. So that's one of the fun things that I did. And I in that work, I went to cities all across California, worked on cannabis ordinances, so to open up those markets and create opportunities for people to open their businesses. And then, navigated the planning and building departments of these various cities. And it was a really eye-opening experience what the differences are and how cities operate in that way and how easy or hard they can make it to open up a business. And so then I went on and started my own consulting firm where I help small businesses navigate those planning and building departments and figure out what to do next and how to stay compliant. And it's fun. It's challenging. I think it gives me a really good perspective of not just the work that I do in the community, but how, from the small business perspective, how hard it is to do that and the work that we need to do to make it a little bit easier for folks to do that work. So
right. So very active in the community, neighborhood association, business. Do you like or defy political labels?
I hate labels.
Okay.
Though I've been have had many put on me in this experience, which has been really eye-opening. But I don't think there should be labels. I think that people are people. I think that, I represent almost 70,000 people, and they have very different views on all kinds of issues. And that this job requires not just doing what I think, but also really taking into consideration what all of those people think and what's the best decision for them based on the various needs of the community. And it's a really challenging job for that reason, because no matter what, you're not going to make some people happy in every decision you make, but you have to try to balance those things as best you can. And I think putting labels makes it harder to do that work because people want to put you in a box and they say, okay, this is this. If you're this, then you do this. And so when you don't do that thing, it really, I think, challenges people's perception. So I prefer not to be labeled.
Right. I have a bunch of adages from my 30 years, and one of them is, maybe they're cliches, I don't know, that if you don't have some people who disagree with you or even upset with you, you're not trying hard enough. You're not provoking enough of a debate or a discussion about what you care about. Because if everybody is happy with you, then you're just not putting much out there. And so I know you understand that.
And it's just not possible. It's not possible to make everyone happy. And I think that's you learn that at such a bigger scale in this position. And I'm sure it only becomes more intense the higher levels of government that people are in. But the job is being rooted in who you are, what you believe, what you know is right, and still walking that path regardless.
Yep.
And it can be challenging, but it's also rewarding.
It is rewarding. So without labeling you, I do want to ask you about style, and whether you think about your own approach. For example, your own approach to how you deal with people who who disagree with you, or maybe even more than that, people you disagree with. How do you intend, or how have you found what works for you in terms of how to tolerate disagreement and how you want to model interacting with people who might have a different point of view than you on any particular issue?
I think as it relates to the community, it's always creating open space for dialogue where people can come and express themselves and disagree, but still move forward together. Because I think the most important thing is accomplishing things that matter to the community, right? And you can only do that. Sometimes it's not perfect, it's messy, it's challenging. People won't agree on everything, but as long as you commit to moving forward together and have an open space for dialogue, I think that that's what it takes to do this work. And then internally, with my colleagues on the council, like I very much see myself as a bridge builder, building relationships, making sure that there's trust and that there's understanding. And even when we don't agree on everything, that you can still rely on me to be honest and to try to find a path forward together that works. And sometimes that means compromise, but that's the work, you know. You may not get everything at once. I really build that off of my time in the legislature, doing advocacy. Whenever you have a really big goal that you're trying to accomplish, if you think that you're going to get everything done in year one, you are wrong. And you have to take a long-term strategy to everything. So what piece of this can I get done in year one, year two, year three? And then after 3 or 4 years, you've gotten everything done that you wanted to accomplish. And that's great. But you have to have that kind of piecemeal attitude and being willing to compromise and work together. And so that's the perspective that I take here too. I have a lot of really big ideas, and I know my colleagues do too. And I don't think I'm going to get them all done on day one, but I do think that, you know, we can work together on pieces of those and accomplish something big in the next 4 years. It
really is a matter of sticking with it and sticking with what you care about. And you're right, developing trusting relationships and moving as fast and forward as you can at a time. And then you said it so beautifully, looking back over the horizon and saying, oh my, look what we all got done together. So right, that is the right approach. In our remaining few minutes, talk about District 5 and talk about your priorities here as a city councilman. I mean, as you talk about an ambitious agenda, as you look at 4 years and no doubt beyond 4 years in terms of your own career, what are those priorities and how do they relate to the district?
Yeah, so one of the things that I very intentionally did on the campaign trail was it wasn't just me talking at people and telling them what I thought. I spent a lot of time listening, going and talking to people in the various neighborhoods and saying, what do you need? What are the challenges that you're experiencing? And so, you know, the kind of policy platform that we put together towards the end of the campaign was built upon what people told us they needed. I think people are the experts, community members are the experts on what they need. And that I see my role as helping shepherd across those policies that address those concerns and those needs. So what we called it was a new deal for District 5, and just really focusing on, first and foremost, housing. That was, you know, one of the number one things that I heard from people is the challenges in finding and affording housing. And so that's going to be different neighborhood by neighborhood. There's some neighborhoods, we talked about the G word, that are gentrifying and that there is a big risk of displacement rapidly. There's interest in home ownership programs there. There's interest in making sure that we, you know, have policies in place that can keep people in their homes and make sure that they can have home repairs and electrification, all the things that they need to do to help them stay in the neighborhoods that they're in. There's other places where we need to really focus on building affordable housing and building supply at scale that we need so that more young people and people all across the spectrum are able to find housing in whatever neighborhood that they want to live in. So that was a big one. Pathways to quality jobs. So really working on building out, you know, as I talk to some of the labor unions, especially the trade unions that have great jobs that pay well and benefits, they're oftentimes having trouble filling those jobs. So there's this connection point that's missing in a lot of the neighborhoods because there's people who want the jobs and the jobs that exist, and there's not the piece in the middle sometimes. And so working hard with them to ensure that we have those connection points for quality jobs that allow people the economic mobility that they need is a huge one. Obviously, homelessness. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that. That was the number one thing that was on people's minds all across the city.
Of course.
And of course, yeah. And so I think that we've already done, you and the former council, I didn't have a part in this, have already done a really big step, and that's that city-county partnership. Really creating that pathway so that we can move forward together as a region is, I think, the path to starting to help people get off the streets and seeing success and getting the capacity that we need in terms of shelter space and drug and alcohol treatment and mental health programs. And so I only want to see that be built upon. And I think that that's the path forward. So those are three of the major things, but there's also a lot of other small things. I could talk forever about.
The commercial corridors.
Commercial corridors, a big one. Public transit is another very big one for me. So I'm very glad to be on
You're
the
on the
board.
RT board?
Yeah, Sacramento
Who
RT.
made that appointment, by the way?
I think it was the mayor.
Okay.
And I'm excited to be there because I love the travel. And if you go to cities our size, not just in our nation, but around the world, you'll see that they have really robust quality public transit systems that get people to the places that they need to go, and that they can rely less on cars. We have a lot of good starting points here as a region, but I think we just really need to focus on making sure that we have the funding that we need to build the light rail and the bus systems, and to get people where they need to go so that they use them consistently. And that's going to bring quality of life for everyone, right? It's good for small business. If you're driving 50 miles an hour down one of my corridors, you're not stopping at, the small business over here. You're driving fast. If you're on transit, you're way more likely to stop into a retail shop. There's research that shows this. So it's good for small business. It's good for people, right? So if you're not spending an extra hour or two in traffic every day to get home and back, that's less money that you're spending on childcare, and that's more time that you're spending with your family. So it's quality of life too.
So you mentioned transit. I don't want to end this without talking a little bit about the city's role in combating climate change and what you think, or if you have any just big picture thoughts or any specific ideas about what the city's role ought to be in being a leader on climate.
Absolutely. And I know that you have your the Mayor's Commission on Climate
Mayor's
Change.
Commission on Climate,
Yeah.
and the electrification ordinance. What we're really trying to do is find a source of local funding so that we can match a lot of the state funding and federal funding that is out there to finish our bike lanes and do so much more in the city. And that's that budget question again, right? Old city, new city.
Walkability, bikeability, that's a big one. Again, like EV infrastructure, that's another big one. I mean, I live in South Sacramento. If you go, there's an app called PlugShare, because I drive a really old EV. It's 2012, and it will not keep a charge for anything.
You drive a 2012 EV.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Pioneer.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get it in 2012.
Okay.
But I bought a used EV. But if you look at the map of where EV charging stations are in Sacramento, you will find almost none in my district, literally. And so that's a challenge for, if we want people to move to EV, right? To let's say I think one day, hopefully we can move away from car culture in general, but in the meantime, we want people to switch to electric cars so that we're not polluting the environment. How can we expect people to do that if we don't have the infrastructure for them to be able to charge their cars? So they're going to keep buying gas powered cars because that's the only thing that makes sense, because there are gas stations everywhere. But we need to make sure that, I believe, we build the infrastructure, people will then make the switch. We just need to create opportunities for people to do that. So that's one thing we can do as a city. Of course, our electrification ordinance is another piece of the pie. Just making sure that we have all these little pieces that we do have control over. And we're always looking at it, that lens of how does this impact climate change?
So we're at the end here. I want to end, I think, the way that I started, which is to say that you've made a strong impression already, and I know through some difficult chapters, some difficult votes. To me, you've shown real strength and a willingness to use your independent judgment, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? And that's what people, I think, want from their public officials, those who are willing to make the best call, stand by that call, and move forward. And so I just look forward to the months ahead. And I want to thank you for being my first guest on Warm Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.